more. And if you are joining us over at supertalk.fm or streaming us live on SuperTalk TV, you'll see I'm not alone in the studio today, which is always a lot of fun. Joining me today is Miss Lacey Elkins. She is from Tupelo, but she is also a National Clinical Outreach with Summit Behavioral Center, and she's here today to celebrate her recovery story. So welcome, Lacey.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, I love that there's so many people. I know that the recovery community in Mississippi is small, but it's growing and it networks well. And so we have so many friends that have interlapped, whether it's Miss Ruth Ann Rigby, who we actually had here yesterday on Good Things, or Miss Christina Dent, who we just recently met. And so your name came up that way. And so I love it whenever we get these good and positive stories. And also those that have the courage to come out and share their recovery story, because we love to celebrate that here on Good Things. So I'm going to let you take the lead, Miss Lacey. You start us off where you would like with your story, and we'll see where it goes.
Awesome. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Like Rebecca said, I grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and I had a wonderful childhood. I had a great family, but trauma struck, and I lost my father when I was 13 to a tragic motorcycle accident. And so when that happened to me, my life changed forever. And the adolescent brain, cannot process trauma like you and I can, And so my outlet to dealing with the pain and suffering that I was in as an adolescent was using substances. And it started out like most, teenagers. It started out drinking and, other light substances that are now legal in a lot of states. But for an addict like myself, I took that a little too far. And so I went to a few different adolescent treatment facilities throughout high school and things like that. And it didn't stick with me. I did not want to stop using the substances long enough to heal, because it was better to stay numb. And so this continued on for a long time. And I moved to New Orleans. I guess I was about 19 when I moved to New Orleans. And, because Mississippi that was the problem. It was never me. It was, where I lived or the friends that I hung out with. And so I was like, let me do a geographical change. And so I moved to New Orleans. And I lived there for a long time. But while I was there, my addiction grew and it got worse.
How old were you about this time, Lacey, that you finally moved to New Orleans?
19. I was 19.
So this has been about 6 years of you trying to not only just grow into a young adult and adolescence and all that, but also compounded with, struggling with, the way that you chose to cope with an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And
19 in New Orleans is tough anyway.
Listen, I thought I was doing great. I thought I was doing great.
And I don't mean that disrespectfully,
No.
but I was, you think of all the places you could go to separate yourself from the things that maybe are enticing you. And New Orleans and Las Vegas are two places I probably wouldn't choose to move, but you did. But that is part of your journey. That's part of your story. So how did things wind up in New Orleans?
That's kind of, as a young adult, I really started to notice my depression then, because I was transitioning from being an adolescent to a young adult, and we developed more self-awareness, about ourselves, about, society and the people around us. And I started to realize that I've been struggling with depression, and again, using, drugs and alcohol to cope with how I felt. And so it got really bad there. And I just continued to cope with, what I knew to be my survival kit. And at that time, it was drugs and alcohol. And I did that for a long time until, several overdoses later, I was like, okay, New Orleans has chewed me up and spit me out. I've been here for 4 years. Like, let me move home, and maybe I'll do better when I move home.
And that's back to Tupelo.
Yeah. And so I moved home. The problem is that, and you have to understand addiction to know really what I'm about to say. New Orleans and the port, you have more drugs, obviously, but the quality of the drugs are a little bit better as well versus, northeastern Mississippi, where, we don't have any ports. Yes, we have trains and stuff, but how did the drugs get to where you are? Well, it passes through a lot of people, which leads to contamination, which leads to not good quality of illegal substances, which, saying that, it sounds, kind of barbaric in a way, but to an addict, it is important because you never know what you're using. And so while I was in New Orleans, I was fortunate to know my surroundings, know what I was using, and I had access to harm reduction programs. And so when I moved back to Tupelo, I no longer had those things. I had no idea what drugs I was getting. I no longer had access to harm reduction sites.
Which, by your definition, those harm reduction sites were just like, were they counseling? Was it just community resources?
It's community resources. So most harm reduction sites offer what they call syringe exchange programs or clean using kits. And basically what that is, you can also get tested for different diseases that you may have contracted either, via substances or just the lifestyle that you live. And so they're a community resource, mostly made up of volunteers that really just care about helping someone.
Safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And so you moved back home and you sort of lost that network of safe spaces and understanding. So what happened when you got to Tupelo?
So when I got back to Tupelo, my addiction didn't say, okay, we're in a different city and state. We'll calm down now. That's not how addiction works. And so when I got back to Tupelo, it stayed the same, only I didn't have access anymore. And so what happened to me was, I guess, 3 or 4 months after moving back, I got really sick. And they don't teach you this stuff in DARE, and I think they should. Not that it would have prevented me from using, but I developed what's called infective endocarditis, which is a heart infection, a bacterial heart infection, usually in one of your valves of your heart. And so after a few different hospital trips, my mom, finally took me to a Baptist hospital in Oxford, Mississippi, and they knew immediately what it was. And so the next thing I knew, I was airlifted to Memphis because they didn't have the team there at that Baptist to really help me. And so I went to Baptist on Walnut Grove Road in Memphis to have a team of doctors and nurses to care for me. And I stayed there for almost 12 weeks, like 11 and a half weeks, in the ICU the whole time. I nearly died.
Was that the turning point for you, Lacey?
Yes. And I'll never forget, I went through a lot in that hospital, and that changed me forever because that's traumatic in itself. But I remember my cardiologist looking at me he just looked at me like it was the last thing he was ever going to say to me. And I felt it. And he said, Lacey, if you go back to using once you leave here, you're going to get this again and you will not bank it this time. And that stuck with me. And it put the fear of God in me. I felt, his honesty when he told me that. And so I went to treatment again, this time as an adult. And I went to treatment again, and I listened. And, I didn't want to be there. And so when I'm working with clients today, and they're like, I don't want to be here, I've already heard this before. I'm like, that's fine, but I don't want you to die. So you need to go, and you need to listen, and you keep processing the information until it sticks, because that's what happened to me. And eventually it stuck.
And here you are celebrating your recovery with us on Good Things. You've now turned your life completely around to where you're helping and reaching out to others. And I think these conversations are so important because often you hear about the bad, or you would just be a statistic while you were within your active addiction. But you're a person. Not only are you a person, you're a mom, and you have a story that's continuing in such a good way. And we're going to have more with Lacey Elkins coming up next. If you are tuned in over at supertalk.fm, you'll see again, I am not alone. alone. I'm continuing our conversation here with Miss Lacey Elkins. She is from Tupelo. She's a national clinical outreach, or in national clinical outreach with Summit Behavioral Center. You work in Mississippi, Alabama. Where else did you say, Lacey?
Tennessee and the Panhandle of Florida.
Which I believe here on Good Things, part of the conversation about addiction and all the problems that surround it is you also need to be celebrating recovery. And we had someone text in. Obviously, we're going to keep you anonymous, but I think they brought up a good point because I talk about how brave you are and courageous for sharing your story, and you are. I think anyone listening would agree with that. But there is a level of being anonymous. That's why they call it, Alcohol's Anonymous for one, where you having that safe space where you don't think people are going to talk or sort of go out and share is super important. So how do you find the balance, Lacey, with keeping that where it belongs in terms of your spiritual connection with your community and your sobriety there, but then also showing people through your story that recovery is possible?
Yeah, so usually in 12-step groups, regardless of, which anonymous program it is, it's attraction rather than promotion, and maintaining, personal anonymity is very important. It's some of the principles in any 12-step group, and, when you're in a meeting, you're anonymous, and everybody else there is anonymous too, to protect them and their job or whatever, whatever it may be. So I always respect those principles given the room that I'm in. But I always tell people I'm not anonymous, everywhere else. Everybody in my life today, I'm very open about my struggles and my past and then what I'm doing today. And I'm open and I talk a lot about that because I want people to know that there's hope, that if I can change, anyone can. And, it doesn't matter. A lot of people think my trauma is not as bad as so-and-so's, and I'm here to tell you that's not true. Everybody's trauma is valid, and I hear them, and I just want people to know that there is a way out, there is hope, and I can help you, if you will let me. I always tell people I don't need people to say, okay, I'm ready to go get some help today. I want people to come to me when they're hopeless, when they're tired, when, they've given up trying to figure out how to successfully use, or they're tired of having that crippling depression where they can't have, a quality of life that anybody would want. That's where I come in. Like, I will help you. And that's what I do with Summit. We have 25 facilities. We do adolescents, we do adults, we do mental health, we do substance abuse treatment. And there's really no barriers with what we do at Summit where we really can't help someone. And that for me, the wrongdoings that I had in my past and my addiction, I get to give back today. And I get to help families, and I get to help, therapists with their clients or doctors with their patients, get them help. And I always say, it's finding freedom. And so if you are struggling, what are you struggling with? Is it, being unhappy? Is it having so much anxiety you can't have a social life? Is it, you can't not drink every day because you'll start, having shakes? Is it opiate addiction, where you have to use substances just to feel normal? Like, whatever it is that's keeping you from being free, that's where I want to be a small part of someone's journey and get them to where they need to go.
And sometimes you need, and I've said this before, see it to believe it, and that's in so many different avenues or areas of life, but particularly in recovery, it's really hard for someone who's been struggling with something to just look at the cookie cutter example of success who hasn't walked the same path and then be able to say, well, I've already ruined that path. I can't be that. But to see an example of someone who has struggled in the same, sort of vein as them, but come out and recreate, rebuild. I mean, you've got 5 years, 2 babies, and a completely new career under your belt, Lacey. That has to be not only inspiring to those that are maybe still in active addiction or wrestling with a family member, but it's inspiring to the rest of us too, who can also say, look, we can take our life to the next level if we want to. You said something during the break here on Good Things I wrote down, and you said, I'm not in the business of changing a closed mind. And I thought, wow, that's profound. Because in the realm of recovery, particularly here in Mississippi, as much as I love us, we can fight change. We can have closed minds. We can be very stick in the mud about certain things and the way we handle things. I think that's changing, but you don't see that as your purpose in life, do you?
No, and I've tried barking up that tree before, and what happened was I got my feelings hurt. And I took it personal when people, basically told me, no, I don't want to either work with you, or you're wrong, and, this is what addiction looks like, and they're horrible people, and, they would use, very derogatory terms, to describe addiction, and I'm like, this is the face of an addict. And I always tell people that do have a closed mind, yes, I'm a mother today. Yes, I went and got an education. I have a beautiful career today. I volunteer at home, on the weekends and stuff like that for different things in my community, Helping Hands being for one. So, no, that whole stigma and with addiction and mental health, those that are stuck in that stigma, mainly because society and too generational. We grow up in the South. I'll give you an example. Some men are like, no, we can't cry. You're not going to cry. You're a man. And that's just so false. That's not true. And it's the same thing with addiction. I think society plays such a huge stigma on addiction and what an addict looks like that they have no idea what an addict can really do if they get into recovery. And so when I encounter someone that is super closed-minded, I'm not in the business. I mean, that's really not my place. That is not what I'm here to do. We can have a conversation, but I'm not going to work harder in that conversation to, discuss topics that maybe you have no room to open your mind up a little bit about.
Because it's going to take a little bit of open-mindedness for us to help those of our loved ones who have found themselves, spiraling or still living. And, and there's a lot that still hold hope. And you have to hold hope, sometimes you have to hold that hope for them in their own spaces before they can sort of rise up to that. You mentioned your mom, Lacey, was the one that had to take you to Memphis. What does she feel like being, 5 years of your sobriety with 2 grandbabies and not giving up on you?
Man, and my mom is your typical Southern mom, Sunday school teacher at a small Baptist church in Tupelo, and I'll say she's my biggest hero. She never left my side. She did not agree with my addiction, and she had, her boundaries, but when push come to shove and, almost 12 weeks in a hospital bed, she never left my side. Literally did not leave that hospital. And today she always tells me, and I share this with mothers that I work with, getting their children into treatment. I share with them that I say, my mom has always told me every Christmas and every birthday or in every Mother's Day since then, no matter what, I could buy my mother materialistically, she always looks at me and says, your recovery is the best gift you could ever give me. And she doesn't lay awake at night anymore, checking the jail roster to see if I had finally went to jail. Or, if I'm not answering, she's not on the phone with hospitals, trying to see if I had finally died. And so she tells me all the time, how proud of me she is. And then she also, there's these Facebook groups of other mothers that have addicted children. And she gets on there and she gives people hope and, lets them know hey, I can relate to you, but my children did turn their life around. There is hope. Don't give up. And she's a little angel.
Well, if you inspired someone today, Lacey, I know you have, and they may not come out and have the courage to share their story just yet, but I know that at least you've sowed that seed of possibility. Where can they go? And maybe if you really have struck a chord with them, is there a way they can reach you?
Yeah, so I'm not fancy. I have my cell phone. They can call me anytime. My phone number is 662-401-1909. Or they can email me, and it's just my first last name at summitbhc.com.
All righty. Well, thank you again for your courage, for sharing your story. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you're welcome back anytime. But you guys stick with us. We've got more for you coming up next.